encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. If you want to be a serious Bible student, a successful servant, and a powerful preacher, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. My name is Robert Hatfield, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things preaching and ministry. I want to welcome you to Season 14, Episode 10, on which we're going to be discussing this listener-requested topic, dual role ministry. We're going to be talking about dual role ministry today, and in particular, the listener has said, what do you do when maybe you're the pulpit guy, but you double as the youth guy, or maybe you're doing associate work, or you're doing prison ministry, whatever it is, dual role ministry. And I can imagine that there are not a few of you who are a part of our episode today that can relate to that situation. Here to help us discuss this today is Joshua Posey, who preaches for the Bowden Church of Christ in Bowden, Georgia. Hello, brother. Good to see you again.
Man, it's good to see you too. Appreciate you having me on today.
Oh, I'm excited about this. I had the opportunity to be with the wonderful congregation there back during the summertime, and that was just great. They love you guys, and they're so grateful for the work that you're doing there, and it's just a wonderful congregation. And so it's great to reconnect with you on the podcast today, but also fond memories of my time with them. You guys were away doing very important stuff like, ushering in a new child into your family. So, important stuff.
Yeah, very important stuff. It was an interesting series of events the first time we got together. So, anyways, that was fun, and probably a memory I'll never forget.
There you go.
But I think the day that my wife actually was put in the hospital, we were supposed to have lunch together that day with another.
Yes, we were. We were
couple.
indeed.
So, and then I guess on a positive note, she ended up testing positive for COVID. So it was a good thing we didn't go to lunch. So
yeah, thanks in advance for that.
Yeah.
That's the thing about COVID is you don't want it to be positive. You want it to be negative. Anyway.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, man, I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited. We love being here in Bowden. We're in Georgia, but we're right on the Alabama state line. Mm-hmm. And this isn't my first time in Georgia, but I never thought I would be back in Georgia. None of my family's from here. So, but we really love this congregation and all the things they do for us. And so we're very fortunate.
Tell us about your time in ministry. You said that you worked in Georgia previously to being there in Bowden. Tell us about the different roles in which you have served, and if you want to include the places and locations too.
Yeah. So the ministry career that I've been a part of for the last I've been in ministry for almost 7 years, and when I was younger, my dad is a preacher, and he always kind of told me he didn't care what I did as long as I was faithful to the Lord and I glorified God in what I did. But if I wanted to be a preacher, he'd be happy with that. So I actually didn't want to be a preacher. I went to Faulkner under the premise of studying counseling, and was going to pursue that, and got one semester in and realized it just wasn't for me. That wasn't my forte or where I needed to go in my career. So that first summer, I started to do what almost every Bible major did at Christian University, is I found an internship.
Okay.
And that was kind of my introduction into a ministry or working with a congregation that I wasn't, kind of familiar with, or a church I didn't grow up with. And so I worked in Hoover, Alabama for a little while for the summer after my freshman year. And then I had the chance to work at the Buford Church of Christ in Buford, Georgia. So that was my introduction into Georgia. And Buford was a very large congregation, and they had a very systematic youth ministry. And I actually, fortunately, was able to work with two different youth ministers during that time. I worked there for 2 summers. And the first one was Brandon Edwards, and the second one was Jeremy Pate. And so I was able to work with those two ministers and see two completely different styles of youth ministry. And after that, I was able to do some college ministry internship and to do some stuff on Faulkner's campus, and then went into full-time preaching after that. So, I felt like I've had a pretty broad experience of the things I've been able to do. And the people I've been able to work with. And so we worked in Lineville, Alabama, which was a small congregation, and we worked there for 3 years to the day, and
Mm,
then started in Bowden after that, and we've been in Bowden over 3 years now. So this
yeah.
is actually the place I've stayed longer than anywhere else.
That's cool. And as I mentioned a minute ago, you are just beloved there. You and your family and your kids. It's just a wonderful thing. So tell us about the role there of minister. You are the evangelist. You're the minister who is on staff, right, at the church there in Bowden. And I'm sure with that you tend to wear many hats as well. I guess in one sense, all of us as preachers, even if you have multiple ministers that are quote unquote on staff with you, you still wear multiple hats, right? It just kind of goes with the job. That's
Oh
kind of
yeah,
what I like about it, honestly, is no one day is ever the same.
yeah.
But tell us about, what your responsibilities are or the different roles that you're involved with there in Bowden.
Yeah. So when I came to Bowden, where we were previously, we loved the congregation. It was a congregation in a small town, and there weren't any elders. And so I
Mhm,
wanted to work at a congregation with elders. And I was young and was really wanting to kind of understand how a healthy congregation could work and what it would
mm,
be like to work with elders as like the actual localized minister.
yeah,
And so a lot of the roles that I had in Lineville are similar to the ones I have here. Of course, the regular roles of the evangelist to stand up and to, preach God's word, and that's
mhm,
typically, 2 times on Sunday, and devotional on Wednesday night, or I swap out with the elders teaching the adult class, and just kind of sign up for the teenage class as it goes. But when I came to Bowden, and I'll talk about this a little bit ahead of time,
mhm.
and we'll get back into it. But when I came here, the minister who'd been here before me was like ultra organized. I mean, everything was delegated, everybody had a responsibility. And so the elders kind of gave me some very specific things they wanted me to do.
Mm,
And, of course, it included the normal roles of a minister, but it also included congregational communication, which,
mm,
I mean, any leadership that's effective is a leadership that's going to communicate. And
yeah,
they said, hey, we want our communication to be more effective. So congregational communication, they wanted me to help with the Bible class program, the
mhm,
curriculum, and to get the younger kids involved, as well as work with our deacon who is over our youth. And
mhm.
so I was able to take some of the experiences I had before and kind of apply them here at Bowden, because when I was at Lineville, I kind of wore every hat.
Yeah.
Um, and we're a smaller congregation, and there were some times where I would preach and lead singing on Sunday,
Mhm.
or I would preach and do the Lord's Supper, or multiple roles regularly. And anything that was done with the youth, my wife and I would plan it. So um, those experiences, I think, kind of prepared me to be able to put on special hats when I came to Bowden. So that's kind of
Yeah.
my role, and I've actually kind of gotten rid of some of those roles, and I'll talk about
Mm,
that some. Um,
okay.
it was some of it happened organically, and I took the principles that I didn't intend to happen and tried to recreate them, and they worked. So that's kind of the way that I've tried to be involved in ministry, is to kind of delegate things out. That was something I'm
Mhm.
not naturally good at. Um,
Mm.
so, and I
Alright.
think I've met a lot of ministers who say that they're not good at delegating.
Yeah, it's rough. Yeah, it's hard to do. So, Ellen, by the way, COVID caused all of us to put on other hats, and many of us to put on hats that perhaps we had never even tried on before. So,
Yeah, yeah, you're right about that.
yeah.
Oh,
So,
man, yeah,
once again, we're all sort of dual role ministers in one
yeah.
form or another. All right, wonderful. So, that gives us some background on where you've been, the different hats that you've worn in the past. Um, so I know maybe there are two main sections of thought that we sort of want to travel down as we think about dual role ministry. I mean, if I'm in a dual role position, so and what I'm assuming this means is not necessarily that, like we've talked about, in one sense, the pulpit minister or the evangelist is going to wear multiple hats, but maybe the specific agreement is you are the associate slash youth is sort of the way that our listener put it. Or in addition to pulpit ministry, you're also going to, be involved in this or that education, Bible education curriculum, that sort of thing. If I'm in a position like this, what do I do? How do I glorify God the most? I think that's where we want to begin, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, I I want to go ahead and say that just from me being in a dual role a few times and wearing different hats, like you're saying, whether that's a pre-agreed upon maybe contractual thing that
Hmm.
we've agreed on before I've come, or if kind of the expectation has just fallen on me while I've been in a congregation, or if I see a need and I take it on myself, whatever
Yes.
the case is. Um, if I'm serving in 2 roles, I'm gonna make an assumption because this was true about me. When I've served in 2 roles, it normally meant that I had kinda limited resources. Uh,
Mm.
and so, sometimes you come to a congregation and they've got tons of resources, tons of people who've been doing X, Y, and Z their whole life or, for the last 15 years, and everything is well organized. But if you're picking up a lot of roles, you may not have a lot of resources. So I think,
Hmm.
when we talk about glorifying God, one of the greatest qualities that we can have in leadership is the quality of being resourceful.
Oh,
Um, you know, it's easy to say, well, I wish I had this resource and I wish I had this resource and I wish we had a counseling center and I wish we had, fill in the blank. And
yeah.
all those things are good. But most people that I've been involved with and that I've met don't have just a plethora of resources around them. And
Hmm.
so they've got to be resourceful, and kind of look at what they have and say, okay, um, what can this be in the future? And how can I get to that point? I think that's a
Yes.
lot of leadership and ministry is um, to kind of steal a phrase from the business world, um, kind of visioneering, I guess you could say, being
Yeah.
resourceful with what you have and
Right.
what it can become.
Yeah. That is a great point because sometimes as ministers, we can become so discouraged by what we perceive we should have. And usually this is sort of the greener grass syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Because and frankly, sometimes too, it's inflicted by the leadership, right? So the eldership may say, we want X, Y, or Z. And then when you ask for certain resources that you feel are necessary to complete X, Y, or Z, they don't agree that those are necessary
Yeah.
resources. So,
Yeah.
that can be difficult. But at the same time, so often we fail to just stop and look around and see these are resources we already have.
Yeah.
Or as I call it, low-hanging fruit.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's just as simple as the fact that we have a church building or the fact that we have this, furniture that makes this possible within this meeting space or whatever it is, that can go a long way. Yeah, be
Yeah.
resourceful.
Yeah. So that kinda be my first suggestion
Yes.
in the ways that I've, kinda experienced these dual roles is, like you said, it's really easy to say, "Well, man, I wish my ministry was like this guy," or "I
Yeah,
wish
yeah.
I had, the eldership that this individual had," or, "I wish I had," fill in the blank. And, but stepping back and saying, "Okay, well, what do I have, and what can it become in the future, and what
Yeah.
can I do with what I have right here in front of me?" Um, and that can really be the beginning process of getting to where you might have this dream of where things may be.
Mhm.
um, so resourcefulness, I think, is kind of the first thing I wanted to bring up in this
Yeah.
discussion. And I learned that from some of the guys that I've worked with over the years, that were just particularly good at that. So
Mm.
resourcefulness is,
Yeah.
sometimes you need to find somebody that can train you how to be resourceful, because that's
Good point.
it's an easy thing to say, but sometimes hard to
Yeah.
do.
Well, and by the way, not everything is, technocentric or technologically driven, but at the same time, it's amazing what you can do these days with a cell phone and a computer. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Or a tablet or something like that too. So that's really cool as well.
Oh, yeah.
Be resourceful. Are there other areas of consideration under this point as we get going?
Yeah, so kind of the big idea behind resourcefulness, and that was kind of the umbrella for the first idea of glorifying God in dual role,
Mhm.
is, and I'm going to steal a phrase from David Shannon. Now, I need to go ahead and lay out at the beginning. Most of the stuff I'm going to share with you today, I've gotten from other people. When I started in ministry,
Mhm.
I just started to find as many. You said technology is a good thing. I tried to find as
Yeah.
many YouTube videos as I could of the guys I
Mm.
looked up to, and I wanted to hear what they had to say about leadership, about raising families, about ministry. I mean, the whole nine
Yes.
yards.
Yes.
Which, of course, places like Polishing the Pulpit and all that are great resources for that. But this is a phrase that I'm stealing from David Shannon, and he actually said this in a men's seminar he did back in 2016. And he said that leaders are people movers, or they move people. And that was kind of his overarching definition of
Yes.
leadership. And so as I started thinking about this dual role ministry, I started to think, one of the greatest frustrations that I've had, just in being in dual role, is saying, "Oh, I wish I had more people to work with me." And
Uh,
then when I listened to that lesson that David Shannon did, it was kind of like, he didn't say this directly, but uh, it was, maybe there aren't people around me because I'm not persuading or motivating people to work with me. And
mm,
so one of the things that I think falls under resourcefulness is to be able to mentor or persuade other people to help you shoulder the responsibilities of ministry. And kind of the key verse, and this is the one we've used for preaching schools, and we've used in evangelism for years, is 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2, that
mm,
what you've heard from me, you need to give to others, teach them so that they can teach others. That
yes.
the passing down of leadership, or the passing down of mentorship. If I'm in a dual role ministry, one of the things I don't want to happen is I don't want to burn out. I don't want to get overextended. I don't want to get stretched thin.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to do that is to try to bring people around me that will help me to accomplish what it is I'm trying to do. And that'll keep me from being burned out too quick.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, plug here for a resource, but David Shannon was on this podcast about a year ago, September 2020, season 12, episode 5, the top 3 qualities every leader must possess. And I'm pretty sure he said that quote as well: leaders move people.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I'll
check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes to that.
I think I watched that. I think
Yeah.
he's sitting in his office. I think when y'all recorded that,
Yeah, I think he was sitting at his house actually.
was he?
He
Okay.
Okay, behind the scenes moment here for our listeners and for you, Joshua. But he got up super early to record that because he had just meetings stacked, as one would assume the president of a university would.
Yeah.
And so, we recorded that at like 7 a.m. Central. And so he was at home before a full day of meetings. It was just
Oh,
amazing to have him on, and I was honored that he took the time to do that. But it was a fantastic episode, to the
yeah.
point that you're making. Yeah, I mean, we move people. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's one of the points he made in that. And I think I've seen that podcast, and I almost remember him going from Acts 20 and laying those principles out, or at least
Maybe
mentioning them,
so.
because
Yeah,
that's
maybe
the
so.
text he used when he went through this men's day. And I'll include the link in what I sent you earlier. I'll send you another link for
Yeah.
that Wednesday. It's fantastic.
Sounds good. By the way, so our listeners and viewers know, Joshua's put together a bunch of episode resources that we're going to have linked in our show notes for this episode, Preachers in Training Season 14, Episode 10. So I'm looking forward to sharing those with you, and check that out as well. And oh, by the way, this is the Season 12, Episode 5. Yeah, that's at his house. It kind of looks like really
Okay.
official there, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
there you go.
I'll have to go back and rewatch that.
It's good stuff,
Awesome.
as always. No one's surprised.
Yeah. Let me chase a rabbit real quick, if you will,
By all means.
with this idea of moving people.
Yeah.
I don't want to just kind of state that and throw out 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2 as just like a catch-all verse.
Yeah.
I want to kind of, where I see this in the Bible and where it's kind of been presented to me by other people, is the Apostle Paul while he was in the city of Ephesus. If you want to talk about somebody who didn't spread himself too thin, I mean, a good in-depth study of Acts 19
Mm.
tells us that Paul was pretty busy. I mean, he did a lot while he was in the city of Ephesus, and he did that
Yes.
consistently, for 3 years. But if you kind of follow some of the trails in the New Testament, you begin to see that the Apostle Paul obviously could do everything that he could do because he was able to implement this use of other people in his ministry.
Yeah.
Um, Now, one of the first mentions that I bring up in this is Acts 18. Paul visits Ephesus and he promises them, they want him to stay, but he says, I'll come back to you and we'll work again together. And he does that in Acts chapter 19 and verse 8. And he comes back to Ephesus and he's persuading the people. And he does that for 2 years. He's working in that area. Now, Acts 19 and verse 10 is a super interesting verse to me because it tells me that in those 2 years, and it ultimately comes out to be 3 years, we know from Acts 20, in those years that he's in Ephesus, the text says there in verse 10 that all the residents of Asia heard the word of the Lord
Mm.
uh, in that time period. And if you look at, that section of the first century area of Asia, it's a pretty big area of land. There's a lot of places. I mean, you've got most of, probably not all the seven church. Yeah, you've got all the seven churches of Asia because you've got,
Mhm.
um, Colossae and Laodicea and Hierapolis over in the Lycus River Valley, and it's
Right.
just a huge area. And if you track some of the ways that Paul worked, Acts 20, he goes and has this tender interaction with these elders. And you can tell, like, he's put time into loving and caring for them and bringing them up into leadership. And then First Timothy chapter 1, written later after that visit, Timothy is sent to Ephesus. At the end of Second Timothy, depending on how you pronounce this name, Tychicus, that's the way I've always
Mhm.
pronounced it, is sent to Ephesus. And then, the book of Colossians is written from the perspective of the news Epaphras has brought, who was in that Lycus River Valley with Colossae and Hierapolis and
Mm.
Laodicea. And so, the reason that Paul, I believe, was able to cover so much ground and able to accomplish so much in his ministry is because he didn't just put all the responsibility on his shoulders and shoulder it alone. He
Mm.
had Timothy that he sent back to Ephesus, Tychicus. He's got Epaphras. He's got all these people, the elders in Ephesus, and no telling who else, that's not mentioned in the Bible that he mentored. And many of them, probably he brought them to the gospel. He converted them. And that's how I believe he was able to cover such a big area in 2 years.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so when I actually preached a sermon on this when I got close to 3 years here at Bowden. And I remember reflecting, like, okay, this is what Paul did in 3 years, and this is what
Wow.
I've done in 3 years, which, you know, being an apostle, and of course the many things that were done there were
Mhm.
miraculous, but still, his ability to be able to have such an influence, it couldn't have been done alone. And I think
Right.
Paul demonstrates that through his whole ministry.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And Paul never tried to make it seem as though it was all on his own either, right? So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, so
All right.
I chased that rabbit basically to say that he was able to accomplish all that with so many different people working alongside of him. And then I believe it's through delegation that the congregations across the world could become stronger just by
Mm.
delegating out responsibility. If I'm in a dual role in ministry, and let's just give an example, we could say youth ministry and pulpit, or associate and prison ministry, whatever it
Mhm.
is. There's obviously going to be a lot of hats that I wear. So if I'm, preparing sermons and I'm standing up to preach on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and if I'm at a place where I'm taking both roles, I may be teaching class Sunday morning and Wednesday night.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that could total out to be 5, 6 lessons per week just in your pulpit responsibilities.
Right.
I mean, if you add in, you've got to unlock the building, and then you've got to meet at the prison twice a week, and then,
Mhm.
you've got to, I mean, we could fill in a lot of responsibilities. It makes it helpful to bring people around you and to watch over the tables if you take an Acts 6 term,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that you can dedicate yourself to those things that are important.
That and, it's not and, I'm not saying you're suggesting this at all, but it's not a selfish thing to ask for help, or to say, I've gotta prepare 5 or 6 different lessons, devotionals, classes, sermons every week, and, frankly, Christians are eager to serve. I found this especially to be true post-COVID. People
Mm,
are excited to get back into things. They have some of them have felt as though maybe they wish that they were more active in the service of the Lord and in the church work. And they're excited to get into things, and usually they are very eager to serve when asked. It's just often the case that they just don't know what to do.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that's a great point.
yeah, and bringing those people along with you, and pushing it as, we're working together.
Yes,
That's a great leadership. I mean,
emphasizing
that's
that.
how you not only have leadership today, but you work to make sure you have leadership tomorrow.
Good
Um,
point. Yeah.
that was the problem with Joshua's time. After Joshua died and all the elders who knew the works of God, There arose a generation in Judges 2 that didn't know God and the mighty works he had done. So you've got to bring those people along. I thought about diving into Ephesians 6 on this, but I think we might move on to our other point, verses
Okay.
11 through 16. That's that great
Yes.
church growth passage where,
Mm-hmm.
everything everybody does is done to equip the saints for the ministry, the work of ministry,
Yeah.
for the building up of the church. And so
Right.
bringing those people along with us, being resourceful, and one of the greatest resources we have is people. And so
Mhm.
bringing those people along with us, I think, will help us in dual role ministry to not get exhausted.
Yeah. And by the way, Paul there in Ephesians 4, and I forget, I may have said this recently on an episode, and if I did, I'm sorry. But, that is part of the evangelist's role, is to be involved in that. He gave some to be apostles, prophets, pastors, evangelists, pastors, shepherds, teachers, for the equipping of the saints. I mean, evangelists, we're right in there. And so, equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, that is part of what it is that we are to do.
Yeah,
And yeah, we're fulfilling our purpose in doing that. All right, you said you weren't going to go there, but then I went there anyway. I'm sorry
that's
about
okay.
that.
A lot more notes, but we'll just leave it right there. That's the best thing.
Exactly. That's
That's
it.
great.
So
All
we'll glorify God in this dual role ministry by being resourceful. And as a part of that, not just physical resources, but also tapping into the resources of talents that are right there among the congregation. Good stuff.
Yeah. So I think that'll help in at least the first place.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the second idea I had, and this may go by a number of different phrases, or I might classify it a number of different ways,
Hmm.
but I have it termed as if I'm going to be in dual role ministry, I want to focus on quality, not quantity. And
Mm,
I'll need to clarify that some, but I want to focus on quality and not quantity. And we've talked a lot about being stretched thin, and that's kind of the first thing that came to mind when I talk about dual role ministry
yeah.
is not having brethren right there to kind of bear the burden of the work of the
Hmm.
church, which I hate calling it a burden, but
Yeah.
the things that are necessary that need to be done.
Well,
Uh,
and the thing is, and this is so important, because if you're a dual role, if you have your fingers in a lot of pies congregationally, and then you're trying to reach the community and all of that, burnout, the sense that that work does feel like a burden rather than a joy. One thing about Paul, he continually refers to it, it's a joy to him. It's an honor to get to serve the Lord and even to share in his sufferings, right? And so, yeah, this is a good thing to guard against as we're thinking about this.
yeah, and
Yeah.
when we do feel that burnout, I think we become reactive instead of proactive.
Ah, okay.
We start just reacting, and I know personally, if I feel like I'm reacting to things, then I just try to do more. Like I must not be doing enough. So
Yeah,
I'm
just
gonna
got to
wake up.
double down, get through it.
Yeah, yeah, just push through it.
That
And
never works. It never works.
every time I do that, I feel like nothing changes. In fact, it
Yes.
gets harder.
Yep.
So now, what I'm going to say I'm a big fan of is not because I am naturally a big fan of. It's
Mm,
because I've found it to work, and it actually goes against my personality. But I'm a fan of the term, work smarter, not harder.
mhm,
Now, generally, I tend to be a type of person that like is big visioneering, big dreams, looking off to the future, next big thing kind of ideas.
mhm,
And I have to learn to work smarter in that process and not make things harder for me by just trying to move to the next thing when I get frustrated.
mm,
And so I like to keep that idea of work smarter, not harder, kind of always in front of me. Because if I'm going to be a dual role minister, I need to be effective in planning and thinking through everything I'm going to do. It can't just be like fly by the seat of my pants kind of mentality.
mm,
And I think just in ministry in general, the work of the Lord, sometimes we do fly by our seat, by the seat of our pants kind of things because it's necessary and we don't have a choice. Because sometimes things just pop up, Uh,
mhm,
but uh, I think the majority of the time, the best thing for us to do as ministers is to look off into the future, of course, with the mentality that James brings out. If the Lord wills, we'll do this and that. But I'm going to look off into the future and I'm going to think through and plan through the things that I'm going to do. And I think that helps me as a minister, it helps my sanity, it helps my devotion to God. Because sometimes, when we stretch ourselves thin, trying to serve others, one of the things that gets cut off is our own personal devotion to God. We think, yeah, I'm just getting it and studying. I'm going to get my own devotion while I'm studying, and
Yes.
I'm going to be praying for others. And we can't cut that part out. And so I'm going to think through and plan out everything that I'm going to do. So I'm going to focus on quality and not quantity. I'm going to look ahead and not just say, well, I just want a ton of things, and we're just going to, on Sunday announce something for the next weekend that nobody knows about yet.
Yeah.
I'm going to plan way ahead, and I think that'll help me to keep things divided in ministry. And we were talking about this before. I'm a big person on looking to the organization of things, how I organize my time, how much time I give to certain things. And I know you said you're a big fan of that too. So I got just a couple of suggestions about that. And some of this stuff is going to come from a gentleman by the name of Mark DeVries. Now, he wrote, let's see, this book, which is Family-Based Youth Ministry. This was one of the books I was required to read while I was in school. And then another book that he wrote is called Sustainable Youth Ministry. And I actually, in the links that I sent Robert, there is a article that summarizes basically that whole book. So if you want a 10-page version of it, you can get it on that article. But some of this stuff is going to come from him in that article, and then some other stuff will come from just personal experience of how I can be more effective in this. All right, so he suggests in the book Sustainable Youth Ministry, and that's the article Robert's got pulled up, that for a ministry to be sustainable, it's got to have two stages. One of them is the structure. You want to build it the correct way. And then the second thing is the culture of the structure. And in the structure, he talks about some important things that you need to do to make sure that the youth ministry can be sustainable. I can do this for years and years and years. And it kind of sounds like a no duh thing, but one of the things he does is he says you need to have an annual calendar. And I know, Robert, you probably had people on the podcast. I think I've heard of at least one podcast I've listened to where you've talked about, how far out in advance do you plan your sermons?
Yeah.
I think it's important for the church to get together and say, okay, we're doing these ministries this year. Okay, where does this fit into the year? We want a youth devotional. Say you're over youth as well as preaching. You say, okay, we want a youth devotional every month this year. So we're going to put a sign-up sheet, 12 spots on it. Every family gets a choice to sponsor the youth devotional. Instead of, at the beginning of every month, scrambling and saying, okay, who's going to do the devotional? Who's going to do the devotional? Where's it going to be? Oh, it's just got to be at my house, And then you're doing all the cooking, you're doing all the planning, you're doing the lesson, you're doing the songs, you're cleaning the house, So
Yes.
Having that annual calendar to be intentional and organized looking forward. That's one of the suggestions that Mark DeVries brings out, at least one of the structure suggestions he has.
That's good because it also helps you to balance the calendar a little bit. And, you can sort of view time like a budget and then carefully spend it, and make sure that you're not overcommitting. This can happen in youth programs, that you can overcommit the youth a little bit or sort of burden them by too many activities, like you said, or even to the point you made a minute ago, even quantity over quality, and the quality of the event suffers because you've got so many different things that are going on. It may be better to trim down and really put your best into some of those efforts. And then on the flip side of that, just out of the youth realm, it's important that the congregation isn't stretched too thin. We don't want to have, this event that's a gospel meeting with a meal, and then the very next week, you may not necessarily want to have another fellowship meal, right? Some congregations do meals every week. I know that, but for other congregations, that might be rather difficult. And so it's just something to consider. I really like, and I've mentioned him a ton, Michael Hyatt, not to be confused with Michael Haidt from Bear Valley, but Michael Hyatt, who is a leadership expert from Nashville, Tennessee, former CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers. And he has this concept in his full focus planners called the rolling quarters. and he gives you a quarter at a time on a page, and you can just sort of see at a glance, okay, here's what I have down here for this quarter. And the idea is you're really going to focus on one or maybe two major things during that quarter. Now that he doesn't stress that throughout the planner, but that is a feature of the planner. And I found that really helpful in church work because depending on the size of the event, the demographic of the event, is this a congregation wide event? Is it a youth focused event? Is this a middle school, high school event? I mean, what is this? Just for the older people, how does this work? And if it's a congregational event, there's such a thing as too much. And I've been in places where you barely close one gospel meeting before you start promoting the next thing that's coming up, right? And
Mm.
so the idea of budgeting that time can be super helpful, not just for you from a leadership perspective, but for the morale of the congregation too. So yeah, I think it's worth it to do that.
Oh yeah, and then you have it's like you were saying, you can balance the different subjects as far as
Yes.
what your events are about. One of the things we realized when we came here, and maybe it was because our children are this age, but
Mm,
at Bowden we were having a lot of things for our teenagers. In comparison, the K through 12 or the um, K through 5 group, they
yeah.
weren't really having anything, and
Hmm.
and so we started to try to evaluate. Okay, well, can we throw a few things in there for them that are useful? Can we throw a couple events? And so we kind of uh,
Hmm.
sprinkled those over the calendar for the year. And we said, okay, well, we've got a lot of fellowship events, but we're not really doing any seminars. We're getting together and spending time together, which is amazing. And I think that's
Mm,
a great thing every congregation needs to do. You don't always have to have a 6 lecture weekend for the church-wide
right.
fellowship. Uh,
Yes.
One of the cool things we do here at Bowden is, I don't know if this is politically correct to call it this or not, but we call it the hobo dinner. And basically, a couple
Okay.
of families bring chili base, crock pots full of chili base, and they
Yeah.
have this huge wash pot, a big cauldron that they put out beside the church, and they start a fire underneath it and put those bases in there. And then everybody brings a can of their favorite vegetable, and they just pour all those cans in there, and they mix it up. It tastes different every year. Some
Yeah.
years it's like a soup, some years it's like a chili. And then you get the can that you brought your vegetable in, and they pour the soup in there, and you eat it out of the can. And
Wow.
I don't really know who came up with the idea, but there's really not a huge spiritual focus. We have a prayer before the meal,
Yeah.
and that's about it. But it's a good fellowship event. You want to keep that balance,
Yes.
fellowship events and youth events and kid events. And then, we'll talk about kind of mixing all that together in a minute. But
Hmm.
uh, having that intentional organization of where I'm going. I like that rolling quarter thing. That's pretty neat. I've always seen his planners. They're always advertising on my Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
I've never actually bought them, so I've heard a lot of people rant and rave about them.
Highly recommended. This is mine. It's branded with the Light Networks sticker on it, but
Yeah,
highly recommended. Very, very much a part of my daily processes.
yeah. The ones I've seen, they're you can buy 4 of them at a time for the whole year. Is
Yeah,
that what
yeah.
yours is?
That's what this is. This is a coil one. This is turned into a commercial for full focus planners.
Yeah,
But I'll put a link in the show notes as well if you're interested. But
you might get paid for it. Who
yeah,
knows?
yeah, I doubt that. But anyway, they got this coil thing now, which I kind of like because it lays flat, on your desk and all that stuff. You
Cool.
can do it around. I've been using these 3 or 4 years now, and I really enjoy it. And for me, it turns into not only a to do list, which is on one half of this. Let me see if I can find a page that makes sense. So you have a to do list on one side, for every day, but
Yeah,
on the other side, you just sort of have some notes. And that this to me, the other side turns into notes from phone conversations or brainstorming activities. Sometimes I dream on those notes pages, and then
yeah,
there's an index in the back, and so you can say, okay, for I was daydreaming about this event on page 87. And so later you can go back, and what it becomes then is just the handy companion that is so vital to my life that I even bring it alongside when I'm doing a podcast.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying.
Cool. So
But
you
some people
found
use field notebooks. I mean, there's a ton of these kinds of ideas, and some people take out their phone and use the notes app on their phone. I mean, whatever works for you, just find a way to capture ideas. And the planning aspect of what Michael Hyatt does is important to me, because he's sort of coaching you through identify the top big 3 things you have to get done this week. Then these are the things that are going to move the needle and push you toward your goals. And he walks you through planning out goals that are using a certain, he calls it the SMARTER framework and all this stuff. Hey, to each his own. If this is your thing, do it. If it's not, do something else. But it's my thing, and it works really well, and I've really benefited from it.
Yeah, my life improved dramatically when I started keeping a planner. That's
Yes.
neat. I'll have to get some more information from you about that, because that's
Yeah.
I can see that being helpful with the dual ministry. Having
That's
okay,
right.
here's the goal for this. Preaching. I need to get through this outline, and I need to get these slides done by Thursday, and then now for the youth, I need to do this. That'd be neat.
It's good
Um,
stuff.
anyways, the Rise talks about that planning.
Yes.
We could talk about that all day. To be intentional and organized. He talks about that in that article. And in Sustainable Youth Ministry, the article I sent you. He talks about a lot of other things as far as the planning side of that, having a structure that makes sense. He talks about that from the standpoint of curriculum. He talks about recruiting and job descriptions and all kinds of things like that. He uses a lot of business terms. But super good article as far as a structure. And I think we have to have systems in place. One of the things I do that keeps me kind of on my toes is that, every Monday I'm coming in and I'm sending out what I call my leadership email. And sometimes that email goes to all my elders, all my deacons, and anybody who's involved in any kind of ministry. Sometimes that's just the elders. Sometimes it's just the deacons. But having that communication, I think, keeps things in line. So say, you take point 1, I'm bringing people alongside of me to do youth ministry. Well, the Johnsons are having the youth devotional this month, and Mr. X is teaching the teenage Bible class, and here's something he needs to know, and here's something the Johnsons need to know. So I'm communicating constantly, and I've learned in leadership that builds trust with other people when you're in constant communication.
Yes.
So, this might include sending out weekly emails. In Many churches have this book in their library, The Man of God, written by a number of different authors. But chapter 10 is written by Cecil May, and he talks about the day-to-day of a minister. So if you're interested in kind of reading a little bit more about that, that's a really good chapter. One of the things that I think that helped me, and I'm going to share some resources about what we use here at Bowden, is, you've heard of the phrase redundancy, and I don't know if Robert knows the opposite of what redundancy is. I don't know if there's a word for the opposite of redundancy.
Yeah, I had to get out my thesaurus and look at the
Yeah.
antonyms.
Yeah. But in your car, if you got a tool bag, you might have 2 flathead screwdrivers or 2 sets of jumper cables or whatever. I tend to operate on the opposite side of redundancy for ministry. Instead of having a lot of things that do the same thing, I want one thing that does a lot of things.
Oh, okay.
So one of the ways that I do this is in our Bible class curriculum. Now, this is kind of a plug, I guess you could say, because I've used this so much and it's been super helpful. But we use the Engraving Heavenly Truths system, which I'm sure some of the people who are listening will be familiar with. And we've been using that. We're coming up on year 4. So January will start year 4 of us using that. But every quarter, it's a 4-year curriculum. Every quarter covers a different subject. So right now, that's the website. And right now, we're studying God's plan for the home. We just came out of the miracles of the Bible. And it's a flashcard system that we give to everybody. Now, that's really helpful in a number of ways. First of all, the adults are learning the same thing the kids are learning in Bible class. So mom and dad and Susie and Johnny can talk about Bible class on their way home, and they've all learned the same thing that day. The other side of it that's really helpful is that we give kids flashcards. So we just finished miracles. and this is my daughter's cards. Now, we make our own kids cards for
Mm-hmm.
this. Um, and they're all, different questions: the days of creation, and what was the cause of the flood, and what was destroyed in the flood, and it's all kinds of cards we make for that for our own
Mm.
kids. But I use that as somewhat of a template on what to preach. So I'll
Ah.
preach out of the material that they're learning in class, so there's
Mm-hmm.
continuity there. Then we do kids sing, like a lot of congregations do, on Sunday night, Wednesday night. Well, instead of coming up for to kids sing for new songs or new questions or whatever, I'm asking them the cards. On top of that, when we get the young kids together, we go over the cards during their young kid devotion. We do them on Saturdays or whatever. And then we send out compassion cards to people as a kind of an evangelistic outreach. Well, I have
Mm.
the kids send cards to the same people. So
Mm-hmm.
the opposite there of redundancy, of having one thing that does many, many things, and being able to preach it, being able to use it in Bible class, being able to use it in kids sing, or use it in a teenage devotional. And if the school system teaches us anything, it's that redundancy, or the opposite, I guess, repetition, is super helpful. And having the same thing taught over and over and over locks it into the mind.
Yeah. And from that perspective, we could argue that there is an advantage to you being sort of the spoke of that wheel, because in your being dual role, you're helping to synergize and bring together the various aspects of the work of the local congregation there. Whereas sometimes, you can have different people that are over different things, but one wheel is over here spinning and the other wheel is over there spinning, and they're both spinning, and I guess the work is being done, but they never really spin together.
Yeah,
So, and that can be, it's not always a problem, but sometimes it's nice for the congregation to be at least aware of the other things that are going on in the various areas of ministry.
yeah, yeah. So keeping that everybody kind of connected together,
Yeah.
keeping people on the same, I guess, plane. Now, that is one point that comes out of the family-based youth ministry book,
Yes.
and I've got the ISBN number into that link. So all
Hmm.
the books that I'm going to talk about are, all the ISBN, the 10, IBS 10 is in there. But he actually makes a statement on page 84 that I'll read about the interconnectedness of the church.
Mm.
He says, we may assume that spending money on a youth house or a state of the art youth room is exactly what our kids need, but far too often, such traditional, quote, youth serving practices serve only as a quick fix, patronizing solutions that just isolate kids from the very people they need to be around to develop maturity in Christ. And he goes on to say, he quotes a study where they looked at a number of different families, and those kids out of those families that stuck with their faith, they had at least half a dozen mentors that were present when they were growing up. And so,
Ah.
sometimes if we're doing dual role, we think, okay, these two roles are completely different. But really, everything that the church does is done to one end, and that's to
Yes.
glorify God.
Yeah.
And so if I'm glorifying God, both of these ministries can run side by side, and it's not three separate churches under one building, or
Hmm.
under one roof. And you've got the
Yeah.
young church, the adult church, and the old folks church, and they all do their own separate things.
Yeah.
You have to interlock those people together. And DeVries, in his sustainable youth ministry, calls that a change of culture, which of course
Mm.
also a business term.
Hmm.
But Lonnie Jones, I put his book in there,
Hmm.
Pedagogue, and he takes some ideas from Stephen Glenn, who wrote a book called Raising Self-Reliant Children in a Self-Indulgent World. And he basically has 7 principles about how to raise up self-reliant children. And Lonnie took those 7 principles and translated them into youth ministry. And so that's kind of our goal. Is we want everyone to kind of be self-reliant as
Hmm.
spiritual individuals. We want them to feel, and the 7 points are: I'm capable, I'm significant, I influence what happens to me, I have intrapersonal skills, interpersonal skills, systemic skills, and judgmental skills. And he
Mm.
basically wrote, this entire book based on those principles. of how to raise these spiritually self-reliant teens. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a super interesting read if you're, if you want to give some attention to that. That's a neat book, and you can get it on Amazon, as Robert has that pulled up there.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of the interlocking of the church, that the family influences the culture of the congregation, and the family is strong if the youth ministry is strong, if the young kids, so when you fit all those roles together, you can work smarter and not harder, and all of them can work in the same goal and in the same direction, and you can use that opposite of redundancy kind of idea. So, anyways, I
Yeah.
think when we spend time doing that, it's super useful to have the quality of our lessons and the quality of our events rather than just a quantity. Let's just load the calendar up.
Right. Right. No, I agree. Man, this is good stuff. Take a quick break and remind everyone of the fact that Preachers in Training is brought to you by the Light Network, a network of podcasts designed to encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith for daily Christian living. TheLightNetwork.tv is our website where you can find not only episode archives of this podcast, Preachers in Training, but all of the others, about 10 different podcasts that are currently releasing every weekday, and then a host of others that have run their course over the last little while. Been doing this for about 8 years now, and so we've got quite a catalog of podcast episodes, nearing 3,000 individual episodes that have reached all over the place. And so if you haven't heard some of those, or have an interest in a special topic or something like that, go to our website, thelightnetwork.tv, and click that search bar and type something in there. In fact, as I demonstrated a moment ago, you can type in David Shannon and he'll pop up there. So now you can type in Joshua Posey and he'll pop up there too. It's good stuff. Preachers at thelightnetwork.tv is the way that you can get in touch with me. Love to hear from you, episode ideas, just like this one. We'd love to hear your feedback, ideas you have for the show, or you can join the Facebook group, private group called Preachers in Training. Just type that in the search bar of facebook.com. Ask to be a part of the group, and we'll be glad to welcome you in there. We do try and limit our discussions to preaching and ministry. We don't do a lot of the, here's my church live stream thing. That's not necessarily related to what we're trying to do. So don't be offended if you post it in there and I delete it. We're trying to keep it for the sake of the community. We're trying to keep it focused on preaching and ministry, and some neat conversations take place there. And if you enjoy the podcast, you can subscribe. In fact, that's the way you never miss an episode. Hit the subscribe button in your favorite podcast app, or on YouTube if you're watching the video version. Brand new episodes release every Thursday from our website, thelightnetwork.tv, or those podcast partners. Today, we've been talking about dual role ministry with Joshua Posey. Boy, there's a whole lot to discuss here as a part of this conversation. As we sort of begin the descent of this episode, what do we need to say sort of in summary or in closing today?
I think probably the main thing to remember, at least the thing I've reminded myself of constantly,
Mm-hmm.
is the ultimate goal of ministry is to glorify the Lord. That's the ultimate purpose. That's what I want to do. And in any role I find myself in, if I can work with my mind and kind of work things out that way, and then work out through the truth, trying
Yes.
to encourage people and bring everyone together and get everyone on the same page, then the Lord is glorified when the truth is held up as the most valuable thing. And so,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm working in a dual role position, I'm going to work on that discipleship process of bringing people to me to work with me, and then I'm going to try to do everything with a final purpose, and that's kind of
Yeah.
the Lonnie Jones stuff we were mentioning at the end. Everything has a purpose. Ministry has a purpose, and we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to get to a certain purpose in their lives to convince people that being a kingdom citizen is the most amazing life you can live. And so
Mm.
it's the most meaningful life you can live.
Yeah.
And so if I'm in that role, any role I feel, I want to keep my mind and my eyes fixed on the Lord. And as I go through that, I can begin to try to influence others and help the church become stronger.
Yeah. So we want to work hard. We also want to work smart. We
Yeah.
want to be sure that we're enlisting help as we can. We want to not be overworked. And so we want to monitor our schedule, and that brings time management and some of those kind of keys into it. And I appreciate that the overarching tone here is that, dual role ministry is a positive thing. And I think sometimes we wish, if I just be focused on one area or one aspect. And I would argue that in ministry, that is probably like some, pot of gold at the bottom of the rainbow. I mean, I don't think that such a role actually exists. Maybe there are some where it does, but we also aren't the kind of people that are going to say that's not my job or that's not in my job description. If I see a need, I'm going to try to do the best I can to meet it, or to help the leadership to also see that need, and whatever we can do within the confines of Scripture and the organization of the church to make sure that those needs are met. So good stuff. All these episode resources that Joshua's mentioned today, and even a few that were not mentioned today, will be linked in our show notes at thelightnetwork.tv. Look for Preachers in Training Season 14, Episode 10 on dual role ministry. We're going to link those there, and also some of the other things that we've mentioned along the way today as well. Brother, thanks for being on today. Appreciate you. Appreciate your work and your thoughts. It means a whole lot.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. I appreciate the invitation. It was an enjoyable podcast.
Yeah, it went by fast.
Yeah.
And thank you for being a part of this edition of Preachers in Training. Hey, join us next week when Bill Burke is on to talk about principles of exegesis. We're going to be studying principles of exegesis this time next week on Thursday from Preachers in Training Season 14, Episode 11. Until then, thanks for being with us today. I'm Robert Hatfield. Let's go preach the word.